This is Tariff Talk. I'm Carlos Perico, Senior Director at Procurability. And today we are discussing the biggest opportunity for companies to gain a competitive advantage during this tariff uncertain market. We asked you on LinkedIn what you thought the biggest opportunity could be. Let's take a look at the poll results. So the poll is telling us that the biggest one here is diversify supply chains. And I don't think that's anything surprising for some of us, but it's interesting to see that everyone is paying attention to that. I like build strong relationships. I think that's going to be a key tool for everyone in helping navigating this tariff uncertainty for now. Digital transformation and very little on innovation. Interesting. Very good. Okay. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our guest. Our guest is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. Sarah, welcome.
Hi,
Sarah
thanks for having me.
You are the host of an amazing podcast. Let's talk about supply chain. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain. Also the Blended podcast and founder of the Blended Pledge as well, which is our nonprofit. And yeah, I've been in supply chain for just over 25 years on the freight side, got into media about 2016, and Let's Talk Supply Chain was born in 2018. So it's been a fun ride, and I'm excited to be here with you, Carlos.
Thank you for joining us. And I just heard you say that you started with freight, and so that's quite applicable in today's topic. So thank you. I look forward to hearing your insight on this.
Yeah.
I want to remind everyone who is on the audience that we are live. Therefore, you can use the chat, you can comment, you could post some questions if you want, and we'll try to answer them live. Let's get into it, Sarah. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, I am just glad I'm not in freight today.
Indeed, I think these guys are going to get a little bit hit with extra paperwork to do in the next few weeks for sure. All right, what first question for you? What are some emerging trends in tariffs and I would say in overall trade uncertainty that you think companies should be aware of?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that's coming at us sort of fast and furious a little bit. Nobody knows what's going to happen, so everybody's trying to sort of prepare, right, in the best way that they know how. Some retailers, I think, are going to want to stock up. But of course, that takes more capital. And right now, financing is costing a lot more. So I think that is something that's being brought into some of the conversations around how do we prepare for this if we would usually stock up. But we potentially don't want to right now because financing is costing a lot, then it's, changing that dynamic and that conversation. I think the other, I on my live show, I do a live show on LinkedIn called Thoughts and Coffee every Tuesday morning. And I talked about an article around tariffs, who would be affected, who would not be affected. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was that off-price retailers aren't too worried about tariffs because they actually buy the overstock and they sell it at reduced prices, and it won't affect them as much. So like a TJX, a Marshalls, a Ross, those kinds of retailers aren't necessarily going to be, or they're not as worried as retailers are. And I'll pause there. I have another one to share, but I just wanted to see what you had to say about some of that stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not very familiar with retail, so this is good learning for me to hear from you. And I could imagine that some of our audience is thinking about that stocking up, right? I better get my inventory in check, but then financing is not at the lowest rates at this point, and we saw that the rates are staying flat now after the news yesterday. So interesting points. I think that's also a little bit of a mitigation for short term, and I agree with it. Right, we need to stock up for inventories, try to make the best advantage of that. We need to start looking as well as you cannot just overbuy, and what are you going to do in the long term as well, right? So looking forward to checking that on that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we need to consider is also how much pressure these tariffs are going to put on our friends that handle the customs clearances. right? Either in Canada, the US, in Mexico. The last time this happened, I know a few people in that part of
Mhm.
supply chain, and they worked over the weekend. They worked all weekend because they had to get up to date on the tariffs and all of that kind of stuff. So, be kind during this time, especially to our friends on the front lines who are handling some of those clearances. And then I think also we want to be looking at other things that are coming up, which is like sustainability regulations that aren't necessarily always tariff related, but these are regulations that are coming through from the EU on some of the products that we're bringing in as well. So, some things to kind of think about when we're thinking about emerging trends, not just in tariffs, but will also create some of that trade uncertainty.
I Your comment about be kind with the people that are processing all these imports reminded me of this, that you may think you're not impacted by the tariff itself
Mm.
based on your commodities that you're importing, but you're using the same custom brokers that most people are. So I think it's a great point to remind everyone to expect some delays, even though you may not be affected by it, right? And then the lead times are going to get longer for everyone at that point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Let's continue. I also want to ask you about the balance act that I think most of us in supply chain have to do, supply chain and procurement, whereas how do I mitigate the tariff risk while at the same time support the business on remain or gain competitive advantage in these markets? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So while I'm not a tariff expert, I just want to put that out there. I'm not a tariff expert. I think there's a lot of things that we can be thinking about, right? One of the things that I was thinking about the other day was how do we build a supply chain or a flexible supply chain game plan? And I was thinking about the game Tetris. So treat your supply chain like a game of Tetris, right? We need to adjust and fit some of the pieces
Hmm.
as some of these new challenges arise. And that's what supply chain professionals are good at. They are problem solvers. They thrive in problem solving, right? I think we need to look at diversifying suppliers across multiple regions to reduce some of the dependency on any of these single markets that might get hit by some of the tariffs. Bonus points for nearshoring or maybe reshoring to dodge some of those tariff headaches, which is what some of these tariffs really are coming down for, because they do want to bring some of the manufacturing back into North America, I believe. I also think about, competing with creativity, right? Investing in research and development to create tariff resistant products, or maybe explore some niche markets with less trade friction. Think of it around, innovating through better materials or
Hmm.
rethinking some of your product designs. I know that that's a heavy ask, right? Because it's time consuming, it takes some investment, but that also is something that you can think about when you're trying to maintain competitiveness, and also deal with the tariff risks at the same time.
I like your points specifically to that. What I was saying earlier is a short term and a long term game at the same time, right? You need to be paying attention to what you're going to do right now for your orders. Some clients of ours have orders on the boat coming in, and what are we going to do about it? But then what am I going to do in the long term, right? We need to stay ahead. And your comment about reshoring and nearshoring reminded me of clients that I have worked in the past where heavy imports from Asia, and we run a whole project to identify a better location for them, and it transformed it from just importing to becoming a actual manufacturing site. So it changed their business model, but it benefited financially quite a bit. But it's a heavily capital investment. It takes time, but looking ahead, I think, is quite important. So right on point. And your comment about diversifying earlier is right where our poll was suggesting, right? So
Yeah.
so we're very aligned with the audience today. That's great.
Yeah, I
What
will say about your poll, though, I was surprised that there was nobody that said focus on innovation.
no innovation
Because really, at the end of the day, what are we talking about? We're talking about innovative ways to be able to combat, some of the risks,
is uncertainty.
the
You're right.
tariff, the uncertainty, that kind of thing. So really, they kind of align with sort of that thought around innovation.
I'm sure they're listening now and they're changing their minds as they hear you talking about this. Sarah, What about the other side of the coin here? We're trying to be better, we're trying to improve, but a lot of our clients and companies make mistakes when we do that because it's uncertain times. What do you think are the most common mistakes that supply chain folks in companies ha- end up making while navigating these uncertain times?
So I think that there's a few. One that came up for me while I was thinking about this conversation was around the crystal ball syndrome. I think sometimes companies act like they have a crystal ball, and I'm guilty of this because when I have guests come on my show, I ask them, get out your crystal ball and tell us what the next year is going to look like. And I think companies try to predict almost every single tariff change or maybe every single risk. And they're doing that instead of preparing for unpredictability, right? They pour resources into guessing what's next rather than potentially being flexible, resilient systems. It's like, betting all your chips on one roulette number. Now that's exciting and everybody's going to cheer you on.
Risky.
But you might lose big, right? If that wheel spins differently than expected. So I think we got to work with what we've got. We do have to anticipate, and I think we have to prepare for the unpredictable. But I don't think anybody really has any answers right now. And I think the other thing to talk about is data. A lot of what I've been talking about recently, I just had somebody on my show this week talking about how important data sharing is amongst organizations. I think we need to get more comfortable with data sharing. I also think that we need to think about data in a bit of a different way and the outcomes that come from the data that we're looking at. I had somebody on the show talking about how humans bring an element to data outcomes that actually bring in bias. So if we are delivered an outcome by the data, but we're uncomfortable with it, we don't like it, we don't
Okay.
trust it, we actually bring some bias to the table when it comes to making some of those decisions. So just a few things to think about when it comes to a variety of different things. But yeah.
Try to be objective with that data. I think we're all guilty of that when you're looking at those numbers, and then you may have some experience with that. You may not like the outcome, even though the data is telling you that. So definitely you could influence that, right? And
Yeah.
that's a really good segue onto the next question I wanted to ask you, because the bias touches the soft side of our function, that is the stakeholder management, right? How do
Mhm.
we do that? And I wanted to ask you about maybe some suggestions or recommendations. How do we communicate this uncertainty? Because you're dealing with it as an individual, you're the face of it in supply chain and procurement, but you have a variety of stakeholders with your customers, with your internal operations, with your investors in some cases, and consumers directly, depending on your industry. So it's very important to understand that you are not only the face to manage the situation, but you are expected to communicate and keep everyone kind of informed. So what are your suggestions to do this well?
Well, and that's just it. I think the number one thing we have to think about and sort of talk about is communication. I came up with this term called the trade tea party. So treat communication like you're hosting a tea party, and maybe you do it. Maybe maybe you get everybody together and you're like, we're
I
gonna have
want
a
to be
tea party
invited to
today.
that.
And it brings some of the tension down so that everybody can get comfortable and everybody gets a seat at the table, right? No one leaves sort of wondering what's happening. So you want to share clear, transparent updates with the stakeholders in a way that's easy to digest, right? You want to use newsletters, quick video updates. You can use fun visuals. Maybe call them tariff trackers to explain the impact and the action plan and how you're going to pivot if it goes one way or the other, so that everybody knows sort of what your plan of action is, what their role is, and what their expectation of you is as well. And that should cover customers, suppliers, investors, all of the stakeholders. When it comes to suppliers, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit harder too, right? Because you don't just want to go to tier 1, tier 2, you want to go all the way down the line. And in some cases, somebody said the other day, somebody has like tens of thousands of suppliers in their database. And so how do you do that? How do you come up with an action plan for everybody? I mean, you got to figure out the priorities and who's going to be affected by the tariff uncertainty. And then going back to what I was saying before, around the data sharing, I always say collaboration is the future of business. And I think it's so true, right? You have to not only collaborate and communicate internally, you need to do it externally. You need to share data. You need to share what's happening. You need to share how you're thinking about it, what your expectation is of that supplier, of that customer when it does happen, no matter what that looks like.
Mhm.
And I think you really just want to communicate that you're working to minimize cost impacts, right? Maintain that quality that everybody's looking at. You're looking at ways to find new supply chain opportunities, right? So keep that vibe collaborative, keep it upbeat, keep it positive, because that's what's going to help you build trust and sort of keep everybody on the same page.
Yeah, I agree with you completely in communication. A mentor of mine many years ago shared a phrase that is stick in my head, that he used to say, silence is the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to situations like this, because many companies will be affected, they try to stay, you start denial, you start staying away, and we need to fight that, right? Even if it's bad news, the best way to do it would be to manage it on communicating it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's factual. And to your point, the data and what is the impact, if there is any, and the plan of action, right? But staying ahead, at least on approaching it and communicating, I think that would, back to both the bold answer and your question and your comments earlier on the strong relationships with your internal team as well, right? And then managing up on how are we going to go through this uncertainty with their support.
Yeah, and I think we need to be realistic as well, right? I don't know is a viable answer as long as it comes with, but I'll get back to you
But I'm
because I'm going to
checking.
go look into
I'm
it and
learning
I'm going to
about it.
talk
I'm
to some people
researching.
and I'm going to do some research, right? I think we have to be prepared for some people to say, I don't know what's going to happen today, but I'll have a plan of action for you tomorrow.
Yeah, and as you said, it is uncertainty, and it's not fair to expect that everyone knows the answers for everything. But we should be putting the energy on learning about it, right? How are you going to work with that balance of mitigating the risk while supporting the business? Because you cannot just become non-profitable overnight. That's not going to help anyone, right? Great insight, Sarah. Thank
And
you so much.
you don't want to make
Mhm.
the wrong decision, right? I was hosting a webinar yesterday and they said that they were implementing some technology and they were in a hurry because they needed to get it done within a certain period of time and they missed asking certain questions. And it actually ended up in disaster. So again, you need to give grace and give your leadership team, your team, time to be able to assess and come up with a viable plan of action and not just ask them to get it done tomorrow because
Mhm.
you don't want a disaster on your hands and you
You
don't want
may
to have
make
to
the
start at
problem
ground
worse.
zero.
Yeah, you may end up making the hole a little bigger just
Yeah.
by running into action without planning, right? Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. Great point. Thank you for this insight, Sarah. It's very valuable to get your input into this. I think it's time for us to get a little bit of the questions from the audience and see how we can approach this. So we have a questions from Luke on AI. So with AI being so noticeable in the news, what are your thoughts on the specific areas of the global supply chain we can expect to be disrupted in the near term? What are your
Well,
thoughts?
yeah, I'm not an AI expert, although I do talk about AI with my guests a lot because as you can imagine, AI comes up, I think, across everything. When you're thinking about specific areas of global supply chain, I think it's going to touch every single piece of supply chain. It just depends on how somebody views it and how they view it helping with the process that they currently have in place to optimize and different things like that. I think in my world, when it comes to media and content, we're going to be using AI a lot to be able to help, digest news and different things like that. So I think, it's here to stay. It's
For
not
sure.
necessarily a buzzword because everybody's sort of figuring out how it's going to fit into their lives and into their supply chains. A lot of people are using it for a variety of different things. So I think there's a lot of questions still to answer. I think there's still a lot of discussions to have.
Yeah, I think on my side, my answer to Luke would be I can identify quickly two areas. Let me start with what we were talking about earlier on the customs brokerage that are going to be affected. That layer of the supply chain, specifically on imports, is heavy documentation. I used to do that
Mm, yeah.
many years ago, and I just remember my desk being like folders and
Me
folders, right, and
too.
BLs and
You
invoices,
too?
and
Oh,
yeah.
me too. Like there was just
And the
mountains.
stamps and all that. And I think that has been modernized quite a bit. But I don't have firsthand evidence of this, but I would expect that step will have to be optimized, and it's going to be a lot of AI and technology to make that process a lot streamlined. And hopefully that happens soon, because that, to be honest, that was always a pain, right? And you're waiting for the port to free your container, and what's going on, and where are the documentations. I would expect some improvements on that. Coming to us on procurability, we advise, and we do a lot of work for our clients on sourcing specifically, and we're seeing how the sourcing and the RFP or the RFX space on technology continues to evolve, right? And how we gather the data, and so I would expect more disruption, and as always, I think. When you see in any type of disruptions, it happens and then it starts consolidating. So I would expect the next 2 or 3 years more and more disruption, but some companies are going to fail. Some great ideas are not going to make it. And I would say then the consolidation will happen, and then we should see better technology in the RFX space, but with maybe better names, new names, right? In a consolidated basis. All right, very good. Thank you for that question, Luke. Well, I believe we're reaching the end of our
Well,
of
Scott,
our
I
today.
see Scott has a question. Are we going to
Oh,
ask
do
that
we?
question before we go?
Oh, here
So
it
he's
is.
got
Sorry, I
two
didn't see that one
questions.
coming.
Any thoughts on how to negotiate with AI vendors with the goal of maximizing value and driving cost out? Um, if I can take a stab at that, a lot of the
Please.
conversations that I've been having recently is really about your blueprint. Like you got to you really have to understand your process and what everybody is doing currently, for you to be able to ask the right questions to the vendors, to be able to negotiate and talk about driving cost and maximizing value. That's just something that came up for me yesterday in a webinar that I was hosting.
That I'll take the. I'm not an AX expert at all, and I haven't done any of those negotiations yet. However, I think as any new product or any new service, right? To your point, I would emphasize as a sourcing professional, understand what you're buying. And
Mm,
these being such a new technology, the risk of the shiny objects and the loudest whistles is always there, right? I want to have the best, and I trust maybe you're already married with a Microsoft suite, or you're big on Oracle, or any of the big guys that your company is used to. You may be tempted to just buy the product because that's all you have. So I would recommend going and doing the research. To your point, what is it that I am buying? Why do I need this? What is the purpose of it, right? The need, the fit for need, rather than, oh, this is just great and it's the buzzword and let's buy that one, right? And then understand that, because it does have impact. If you guys have been watching the news on the market fluctuation this week because of new technology, just overnight someone creates better technology and then affects the optimization and the valuation of companies in the world. So it's just so fast moving that I think it's very important to take a step back, Scott, understand what you're buying. It's very new. It has a lot of applications, and that may not be applicable to you. And why
mhm.
would you be buying that? Same as you used to buy any software, right?
Yeah, and references.
And
Always
references.
take time to go and speak to the references on what their experience has been.
Yeah, try not to be the guinea pig for a new technology. Hopefully, someone
Uh,
has been has
Somebody
has
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 to.
done it. Someone, so you can get good references, can get good application, because it's really new, right? So the risk would be there, but I think with some research you can minimize. Thank you. I almost skipped Scott's question. Thank you for that, Sarah. I didn't
Yeah,
see it.
all good.
Very good. I think now we are reaching the end of our discussion, and I think it's very important to stay informed. That's one of my takeaways. Things change quite a bit. If you're interested in getting, continuing informed and understanding more of these latest resources that we have around tariffs and overall trade, we're going to put a QR code very soon. in the on the screen that you could follow and then register for some of that information to keep coming to you on newsletters on our white papers. I'm sorry, white papers. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Sarah, a pleasure to spend some time with you. Thank you for your insights. I wanted to ask you one last thing.
No.
Uh, if you have one takeaway from today to leave our audience with before we depart, what would that be?
I this is gonna sound so corny, but I guess embrace uncertainty. It's not going away. There's gonna be a lot of shakeups this year, and I think we just gotta try to roll with it.
And try to adapt, right? I
And
think
adapt.
almost every insight that you shared today with us had that element of adapting to it. And it's
Mhm.
okay to not know it, but go do your research, go learn a little bit more. Maybe you don't know. It's okay to say I don't know, but I'm gonna go and learn, right? So adaptability to this uncertain market. And I think with the relationship comment you shared earlier, it's understandable. Hopefully, you already have the strong relationship with your stakeholders, but these moments are an opportunity to build stronger relationships, right? I
Mhm.
remember all the issues we had with the COVID impact. We were all dealing with it in a little bit nervous way, but I can argue and look back that my relationships with a lot of suppliers and key stakeholders became a lot stronger after that. When you share a little bit of that pain, then becomes a little deeper on that relationship.
Mhm.
So that's a good opportunity as well. Thank you so much for your insight, Sarah. Pleasure to have you in the
Thank
in the
you.
talk today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Appreciate your comments and questions. And good luck for everyone who's going to be dealing with this. As you know, adapt, get ready, and keep on learning, keep on researching. Here's our QR code for you